I am so excited to talk to Erica Olenski. I have to first tell you guys before we get into the meat and potatoes of our conversation how Erica and I met. In 2020, I released my book, Find Your Fire, and I was looking for a public relations firm to help me with the launch. And Erica was an answered prayer. She was my account manager at the PR firm that I used at that time. And she was just always a ball of light, ball of energy, so patient with me because I am a hot mess, HAUTE, of course, and just someone who could help light my fire at times when it was damp. So I can't tell you how excited I am that all of you will get a little bit of her fire starter action today, and a little bit of a behind the scenes. So when I was first thinking about doing a TEDx and what it might look like, what it might be called, I went through this exercise of like all the things and we landed on the Great MeSet, not just because it could be a TEDx talk, but it was truly this inner movement for good. You know, leaders create moments for good, and a lot of them happen externally in communities and in the world. But the most important movement we'll ever have is within us. And I truly wanted to live a life where it wasn't from a selfish place of me, but from a place where I was thinking of who I wanted to be and that legacy I want to leave behind. And Erica was my partner in crime to come up with that name. It's so exciting having you here.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's an absolute honor. I could not be more humbled and grateful for any opportunity to chat with you, Terry, because you are absolute light on your own as well. So the
Oh my
feeling
gosh.
is very mutual.
Do you remember like going through all the emails, all the things, trying to figure it out? And like it was also like a lifetime ago.
It was. It does. It feels like an entire lifetime. I mean, 2020 was so chaotic on its own, right? And then we had this really fantastic idea that was, you know, a call or an answered prayer a little bit to the time as well. I think most people were doing a lot of inner work in 2020 just by nature of being kind of stuck at home to some extent. So I think, the story and the message that you had to share at that time was really poignant. And I think there was an appetite and a desire for people to be inspired in ways that maybe they themselves needed to think about their spot and place in the world. And so I loved working with you, Terry. You're an incredible inspiration, and I had so much fun. I had so much fun, and I love that we get to continue having fun now. 4 or 5 years later.
Yes, and like was having a conversation earlier, and the universe just has a way of bringing the people that you need, to you at a time when you need it. Like you attract the people and things that you need to be successful or the best version of yourself. And I'll never forget, I was struggling to communicate. And it was a New York, firm. And I'm just this Southern girl from Louisiana, but living in Austin, Texas. And you're like up the road, like in North Texas. I ended up getting paired with another Texan. That was like mind blowing at the time.
It was. And you're right, because even so much at that time, regionally, with everybody kind of being stuck at home and going inward, I think there was something so almost cathartic a little bit about being able to connect so close geographically, even if we weren't in physical space together all the time.
Yeah.
But just, sharing a similar perspective on the world when everything was so chaotic. It was really nice as well.
Okay, enough about me. I want to hear all the things about you. I want everyone to hear all about you. You have lived like 10 lifetimes. Like cats have nine. You're going to have more than that. Like it's going to be 10. You've
I
done
feel that in
you've
my
done
soul.
all the things. You've had these incredible roles where you've been a culture shifter. So I'd love for you to just start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today, even before we get into this rich, incredible family that you have.
Yeah. So I think when you think about, I guess when I think about movements, especially in context to like either the MeSet or just like being a fire starter in general, right? Like that spirit of that, I would say I've always resonated with that spirit of a fire starter. When I was rewind a little bit all the way back to college, I was studying public relations at Xavier University in Cincinnati. And I had just come off the heels of a role working in a radiology department. And it was my first introduction to healthcare, had never thought of myself as somebody who would go into healthcare broadly. But I was recruited for the role, and it just sent me down this path that I never in a million years expected. And I fell in love with healthcare as an industry. And something that really struck me and stuck with me in that role was how especially sacred the work is that we do in healthcare. We're meeting people and patients and caregivers in some of the most vulnerable and formative moments in their entire life. They get devastating, news around diagnosis. And the spot that I was working in at the time was radiology. And so being in part of that diagnostic journey, especially when you look at the whole patient and caregiver experience, you just realize how sacred those moments are and how formative those become to even the stories we tell ourselves about what we go through. And so even at that young age, I was recognizing, that work was really important. And although I wasn't a clinician myself, I was set on this path and inspired to go and explore what a public relations person might bring to healthcare as a part of that journey. And so that's really how I wound up getting, started in healthcare overall. And it's been a constant theme in my career now, almost 20 years later. I'm still working in the industry. I'm still working in this space. And I absolutely love it. I mean, I've tried leaving a couple times, candidly, from the industry, and always wind up coming right back because of the work being so fulfilling on a spiritual level and emotional and physical too. But spiritually, it was just so fulfilling to work in that space. So early on, I was using that context. I was in college and studying public relations and decided to actually focus my degree in healthcare communications after having this very formative and intense experience. So I graduated with this degree, you know, unofficial specialization in healthcare, and wound up working for a healthcare integration engine vendor, which is a very fancy way of saying that this company was building a software solution that allowed hospitals and health systems to share data with one another. That's the heart of it. And at the time, the government was very focused and legislation was very focused on incentivizing healthcare providers to do that. They wanted them to move to electronic medical records for lots of different reasons. But, the core of it was that the industry was shifting into a space away from paper owned records that physicians themselves kind of owned the data of. And can we take the data from patients and make it more usable and collaborative with other physicians? Because the reality is, if you go see a doctor, some of us get the luxury of only ever having to see one doctor. But in some cases, you have to talk to multiple. And so having them being able to collaborate and connect with one another and share that patient information is an essential part for them to be able to work together. Because without that, you have no shared kind of knowledge or context. So I was working for this company, and one of the first jobs that they gave me as a new grad, very green, going to take on the world kind of energy. They said, go figure out this social media thing because we're thinking that's probably a big deal. And, if you rewind the clock, I mean, at that time, everyone was just posting their lunch. And so most weren't even very clear about how they were going to use Twitter or
Oh my
Foursquare.
gosh. Do you know what to say? You said
Any of those.
posting your lunch, and it took me back to when I was mayor of
Yeah.
Flemings in Austin, Texas on Foursquare. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow.
Right. So funny little tidbit on me. So I think it was 2012, I was nominated as a Foursquare Mayor of the Year award.
Oh my
With
gosh.
the Shorty Awards.
That
And
is
so
wild.
it is. And so I was up against Michael Bloomberg and oh my God,
Oh my God.
the Steve Wozniak
That
from
is wild.
And it was just like little old me, Foursquare super user coming over from Texas. And I was in,
Oh,
Manhattan and Times Square and got to sit at this award ceremony. And I didn't win. Michael Bloomberg got a hometown advantage. But
I mean, kind of like the mayor, the real
yeah,
mayor.
the real mayor, exactly. He was mayor of the year. He got that award. But it was such an interesting experience to go through that. It was really like my first public kind of introduction to the work that I was bringing to the world. And I've always been an early adopter in lots of different ways, whether it was, looking at ways we could think about social media and healthcare and the B2B side of that business, or if it was being an early adopter with Foursquare and trying to just for the fun of it, encourage businesses to claim their location on the platform so that people and consumers and users can interact with them. And so I've always had those common themes. And so that was is an interesting context to go into and start my career, really, because the other part that really stood out to me in terms of making movements is just the power and potential that we had at that time that was unprecedented to build community. And so one of the first projects that I did after establishing the company I was working with on the social media platforms themselves was, what can we do with this? How do we build a movement or a community around the things that we're passionate about as a business, as an industry, and bring people together to problem solve around that? The same way that we would be bringing physicians together to collaborate on care for a patient. The same idea. We can't make progress and innovate without talking to one another. And part of that talking is listening and just meaningfully connecting with one another and building relationships. And so I founded a community called HITSM, stands for Health IT Social Media. And it was inspired by a few conversations that were already happening online. There was a pretty sizable physician community that was using social media to connect with one another and talk about the future of healthcare. But where what I was thinking was, well, this is an important conversation to have, and I'm not downplaying that, but we need to bring more voices to the conversation if we're really going to move the needle on where this needs to go. And so the premise and thought behind that community that I founded with the HITSM group was, let's create space for IT professionals to also contribute to this conversation so that as the industry evolves and thinks about new technology and adopting new technology, we've got the people that have to be implementing it included in the conversation. And then similarly, the people that are the end users, the ones receiving and the benefits of this new infrastructure, the patients and the caregivers, let's make sure that they're included in as well. And so this community became a watering hole of sorts when it came to thought leadership and, just serendipitous connections between people, and then just the heart of it, building relationships. So when we started to have conferences shortly following the establishment of that community and gaining some momentum, it was really amazing and almost magical to see that when we all came together in person, the opportunity that we had created because we'd already been having ongoing conversations digitally and remotely, that when we came together, our conversations were so meaty and in depth and detailed and substantial that we really started to have action come from those conversations.
mm,
And I remember thinking like, wow, how powerful is this that this community can exist both, virtually and in person. These relationships are anchored with physical interaction to some extent, but we're actually able to work and collaborate and create new ideas in an accelerated pace because we're not relying on the physical interaction to drive the conversations. Instead, those conversations can be ongoing and happen all the time.
mm,
And so, that was really, I would say, the first kind of movement that I helped inspire. And I was very, humbled to be in a servant kind of leader role with that and just trying to drive that conversation and keep it moving and encourage people to join the community that were mutually inspired by what we were trying to do. And broadly, it was just really, let's improve healthcare technology. Let's keep innovating in this space, and then the innovations that come from it are very meaningful, very impactful, and exactly what the industry needs, not just theorized of what it might need and then try to force fit it in later. So contextually, that's where my career started. And I think that has been a constant theme through everything that I've done is the role of bringing people together around a common purpose, whether it was within my team that I work with, or if it's a client and, building camaraderie among the leadership team of a client, or if it's, working with someone like yourself and even just coming inward to some extent and thinking about what that looks like. And how do we work together to gain momentum in the fires that we are creating individually and collectively?
Hi, it's me, Terri. Transformation doesn't happen by accident. It's a daily practice. And Best Self Co. gives you the tools to live with purpose. From guided journals to productivity decks, every product is designed right in my hometown of Austin, Texas, to help you dream bigger, reflect deeper, and take aligned action. Visit Best Self Co. and use the code Terri for your special percentage off. Your next breakthrough starts with one small step, and today is a beautiful day to begin.
I I knew a lot of that, but so much of it now makes like so much more sense, you know? I mean, like, let's even rewind and go back to what you said. You started this in like 2012. That's wild. You were like the earliest of the early adopters, because now we don't think twice about having electronic medical records or a medical home, something like a One Medical, or even the doctors who are influencers on, Instagram. My
Yep.
my doctor who helps me, with a lot of my perimenopause issues, she's, has hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram. But you're here in 2012 creating the space, but also recognizing that not just these doctors needed, the ones that are front of house, but the people who are supporting them back of house needed for a variety of reasons. One, they need community and fellowship, but two, they need to understand the physical, emotional, intellectual needs of people who are using the software system to drive change. Like, wow, that's just mind blowing.
It was interesting. I guess this is allowing me to reflect a little bit on that experience too. And I think that there was another skill that I started to develop then that I maybe haven't fully realized until just recently. And that's bravery and
Mm,
being kind of more fearless. Because when you're an early adopter, especially in that space and you're young in your career, it's a little harder for you to justify investments in a lot of ways. There are a lot of people when you're early in your career that are accountable to how you spend your time and resources. And it required me at that point to get buy-in from my leadership to make sure that I was spending my time and energy in a good way. And there was a little bit of confusion at that time. And that confusion, or maybe just hesitation because it's new and different and unsure what the ROI is, you know, um, it meant that I had to kind of put a stake in the ground in a way that was requiring me to be a little more fearless.
yeah.
As I was sticking my neck out, I didn't know what was going to come from me creating a community. Like, and that really wasn't even the whole focus. It was just, let's just try to see what happens with this. And so with that, combining that experimental mindset and then just, having to take a more fearless stance with my own career and know and trust my intuition that this was the right path to go. And I just had to do it, and being called to go that way, even without fully understanding the impact or the value at that point, it started to lay the foundation, I think, for some qualities that I'm continuing to try to develop even today, of being fearless and saying, even if we don't know or understand something fully, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't go and explore it. And it's okay to do that. And we don't need to justify every single action that we do with an ROI at the end of the day. However, you still have to be a good steward of resources as much as possible. But bringing that fail fast kind of entrepreneurial mindset, I believe, really served me well at that point and has continued to serve me well through my career.
But let's break that down, because like you just gave people a whole master class in, how to put a stake in the ground, and but also a little bit of trusting your intuition, that inner knowing, right? And I know you and I share that belief, so like so easy in the workplace for people to get, fully fixated on resources, time and money and objectives. Sometimes people get stuck there, that they don't open up their vision, to really seeing capability and ability. So ability being someone's ability to drive objectives, to drive, plans, ability to see the future, capability, do they have the time and the space to do it? Right. And so that can also be conflated. But for you to lean on faith instead of fear and to say, one, I'm able and willing. Two, I am not afraid and I have the capability to get it done would push you more so to beginning to drive those resources organically. So if I was your boss, I'd be afraid to tell you no.
Well, I had a very great,
Fuck.
yeah, I had a fantastic boss at the time. I mean, his name's John, and he's just, I hope he sees this. Probably will.
Hey, John,
But
I send this to you.
yeah, exactly. He believed in me at the time, and he believed in the bigger picture and the vision and the entrepreneurial, spirit that we were both really trying to embrace and trust at that time because we were in uncharted waters. We were doing things that people had never done before with technology that had never been used in that way. And we had no idea what was going to come from it. But, over the course of a couple of years and kind of grinding with the vision and just trusting that it was the right thing to do, what emerged was a dynamic community of people. And I have to say that that one thing that I did early in my career, the relationships I built through that one initiative are still some of my closest colleagues today. Whether I work with them directly at my company or not, I was just at a conference this week and I came back last night and it was the same people that I was connecting with then, 15 years ago. And we've all gone ebbs and flows in our career and done lots of different things in that time. But we always come back to one another. And I think that that is such an incredibly powerful dynamic in an industry like healthcare, for example, that is just so ripe for change and transformation, as it still is now, as it was 15 years ago. But you have people that care about one another, that want to see each other succeed. And oh my gosh, how powerful is that? Like, what possibilities exist because of that foundation that exists in that industry compared to other industries where, you might know of each other, but do you really share a common purpose behind the why and what it is you're doing?
Yeah. I wanna pivot, and I think it's tied to so much of what you said, where I feel called to head in this next direction. What I'm recognizing, even though I know this to be true about you, but I'm recognizing it even more today, it's you're a fierce advocate. If it's for the start of a new community, or for yourself or for your family, like that is your through line is I am not afraid to take the first step in action and do it from a place that is faith-based and not fear-based and do it with love. Like that is your jam.
Yeah.
When I think about your family, which I was like, oh, 2012, your oldest is not 15 yet. So he came way after that. Erica has three beautiful kids that through line even exists into the humans you gave birth to, you know? And so I want to talk a little bit about the highs and the lows that you've had of being a mom, because those skills that you learned in the healthcare space, I was like, of course, Erica started in radiology. Is that what, when you were, I was like, because I didn't know that or I didn't track that till today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your whole life orders your steps to be who and where you are right now. So, like, you are a walking embodiment of like the Great MeSet. Can you just share a little bit about your journey as a mom? It is, I don't really even want to set it up. I want to allow you to walk us through
Yeah.
that time.
Cool. Well, it's an intense story, and we probably need like 15 hours of time to get people up to speed, and probably will be its own book one day.
We're
Feeling
gonna edit
inspired.
that. We're gonna edit that. It will be its own
It
book.
will be a book one day.
And people that can make that happen. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. Well, let's chat more about that. But without getting too far in the weeds, I think that the story is an interesting one. And you're right, the foundation for so much was laid then. And I look back and reflect on, looking and reflecting in hindsight, it's always 2020, right? You're like, oh, of course that thing happened, and then that thing happened. But I have always felt, because I've tried to make decisions out of faith and not fear, there's been this feeling, I guess, of just serendipitous intervention. I'm not sure maybe the right way to put it, but it's always felt masterful, like there was something bigger at play that I was serving. And whether it was starting in radiology at that time and just feeling inspired by that experience alone, or if it was establishing this community or some of the work that I did even after that project and that company. Throughout my career and even my parenting journey, it really, those are constant themes. And I think it's really poignant you call that out around not making decisions out of fear. And so much of my relationship with my own intuition too, I'll say, is contingent upon not listening to fear. I don't get access as easily to my intuition if I'm feeling very fearful. And I would say, especially over the last few years, that's been very poignant. So for listeners, my personal and professional journey evolves, pretty substantially after my health IT social media responsibilities, and found myself as a patient for most of the 2010s era, found myself experiencing somewhat of a patient journey. I, through that time, shortly after getting married, I started to lose my hair to an autoimmune condition called alopecia, which for a lot of women especially can be a very traumatizing experience. Our hair is so closely tied to how we are viewed in the world and our own perception of ourselves and our health and our vitality. And so when your hair starts to fall out and you otherwise feel okay, it can be very disorienting and traumatizing because your identity starts to shift away from the person you maybe want to look at in the mirror, and who you start to see doesn't match who you feel inside. And that dissonance can be very unsettling. And so I started to go through this experience and progressively lost my hair, mostly from 2013 or so through 2020, until it was completely gone and I had no more hair. But having babies as well in that time was very vulnerable because, even something as simple as, how am I going to time, when I go into labor with my child, how do I want to remember that experience in photos? And, do I look a certain way in the pictures? Some women will curl her hair or whatever and put makeup on, and then they'll be like, okay, now I'll do my pictures. And it's not out of vanity entirely. It's a little bit of just, am I being authentic and honoring who I feel like I'm inside? And is that person who I'm able to remember when I look back at these memories? Because when you have these intense experiences, your recall is also a little bit challenged. And so those photos become a fixture and a really important memory anchor for us when we go through those intense formative journeys. And so I'm losing my hair progressively through the 2010s. And that was very traumatizing. And it eventually led me to a point where I had to shave all of my hair because it was just pretty much gone for the most part. Got my eyebrows tattooed. And that was like the best thing ever. I know. I love them. I wake up like this every day and it's great. But that was hard too, just losing pieces of you progressively over time with no real strong, explanation besides your body is confused. And that was hard to navigate. And then found myself, when we start to get into the weeds a little bit of the family journey. I had my first son in 2014, and by 2018, my ex-husband and I had decided to grow our family, and we'd gotten pregnant with my second son. And the week I was expected to share the news of my pregnancy with my job, which I had held off a little bit too, timing wise, with that pregnancy compared to my first one. And the same week found out that our agency lost two major clients. I was exclusively on one big project with another client, so it wasn't involved with this, but the agency ran out of money and I got let go. The same week I was announcing my pregnancy at work, which at that point I was about 5 months along. So finding myself effectively unemployed and pregnant, substantially pregnant at that point, was very scary. It was a very scary time. And again, though kind of leaned into that faith-based idea, there's a bigger plan here, and I have to trust the universe that I'm on the right journey and heading in the right direction, and that whatever I'm experiencing right now is intended to serve me in the future. And so whatever that looked like, I just had to surrender to it and still do what I needed to do every day to provide stability for my family and address the functional needs of everybody. But at the end of it was still very much a faith oriented experience, I would say, and trying to not let fear conflate those decisions and instead, not listen to the fear and instead just trust the intuition through that. So wound up actually becoming an independent consultant through most of that time. So that's what led me down to that path, funny enough, which has been also a little bit of a constant theme later on in that entrepreneurial spirit in my lifetime. But wound up working for several different groups, several different companies, and delivered my son. And he was a beautiful, full term, healthy baby. Could not have asked for anything more. But fast forward a little bit of time, not very much so, to May of 2019. And my healthy baby, I learned, wound up having a very aggressive form of brain cancer that we found. And so my journey as a parent shifted so intensely in that time where I'd already been dealing with the little, health issues and kind of getting my feet wet, I guess, and in those experiences and how they might, you know, connect to my greater purpose and my own narrative and life story. Everything shifted in that moment. And I found myself walking this very intense caregiver journey with my son as his mom, who at the time he doesn't know patient experience, right? He's 5 months old. And so the failings of the industry as from a system standpoint became very clear to me through that experience too. And having had context in the industry as well was a very bizarre place to be because I knew the language. I knew how to establish rapport with physicians. I knew how to advocate in some ways because I knew what I needed or knew what was right or what was reasonable to expect of the industry at that time. But it was still so fearful. And my relationship with fear just drastically evolved at that point. And I would say probably evolved into a deep space of surrender, even more than anything I'd experienced up until that point.
Yeah. I just gotta take a moment. I mean, it's a lot, to go from a perfectly healthy baby boy to 5 months later fighting, like fighting for his life. And I just got chills. It it's something that many of us will never experience. But for you, it once again, when we talk about the Great MeSet, that's being really focused on who you are and why you're here so that you can first feed yourself before you feed others and do good in the world. I mean, that was crystal clear why you were here and why you had the training that you had so that you can fight for those kids. And you've had so many ups and downs with August over the last, 6 years, but he's still with us.
Yes. Yeah. And he continues to defy every expectation. So he was not expected to survive the first surgery. We almost lost him several times through chemotherapy, almost lost him again after a second surgery. The ups and downs, you're right, are very, very poignant. Um, but it is interesting, right? You mentioned training, and even in that experience, my relationship with advocacy evolved as well, and it's been an ongoing journey in that experience too over the last 6 years or so, because it became so clear to me not just where the system broadly was kind of letting patients and the caregivers down, but those I call them kind of cracks in the foundation of the system. And those cracks, because they were so apparent, it also made so much sense to me that I'd had the context I did when I realized that I wasn't advocating only for my son to get what he needed. The advocacy that I was experiencing was actually so much more profound than that. I was helping pave ground for other patients that maybe didn't have a parent in their room with them, it was striking to me, if you've ever spent a lot of time in a pediatric hospital, especially, you realize how many of those children are left alone in their rooms for days on end. And I wish that it wasn't true, that didn't happen. But that's a reality of pediatric hospitalizations, is that you have a lot of, for lots of different reasons. And in many cases, it's no judgment to the parents, but they might have to work to keep, food on the table and a roof over the head of their children's home. And, or they have other siblings that they make sure that they need to get their needs met. And you're right around the MeSet piece. I had to get a pretty good lesson in how to put my own oxygen mask on first, because out of the gate, when we were experiencing the acuity of my son's condition, and like, oh my gosh, we have to address that he got brain cancer, and we have to muster all of the adrenaline we can to help serve him in this moment. Adrenaline only serves you so much. And frankly, adrenaline can be really damaging in the long run if you don't manage it correctly, which is why taking care of yourself is such an essential thing. And it's not something you need to be practicing once in a while. It needs to be a constant theme that you're investing in every single day. Are you meeting the needs that you have? Before anything else, you have to put your oxygen mask on first. If you do not do that, everything else will fall apart around you, whether it's tomorrow or 10 years from now. But your foundation that you build in your life and the things that you invest in, all of those things are contingent upon how you are caring for yourself at the end of the day. And if you neglect that in any meaningful way, those investments don't get the return that you intended.
Yeah.
It's just, it's not accessible. In most cases, you can actually do a lot more damage that you have to later recover from, which is what I experienced. I relied on adrenaline for a long time to serve me, and it did exactly what it needed to do. However, to my own expense. And so I wound up with a lot more health issues on this other side of caregiving, because those personal needs and physical needs and spiritual needs maybe didn't get the attention they needed early on.
That's right. So right. But I want to, if you're okay, from here, I want to talk more about how August is doing and how it brought joy to your family's life. And then you want to touch on nonprofit that you have.
Yeah.
To close with how you've grown to like advocate on Capitol Hill and whatnot.
I
Also, I
love
don't know if you know, there's a caregivers bill moving right now. Do you know about
I
that?
do.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We helped write that bill. So
Amazing.
and we picked the bill sponsors and stuff. So if they're looking for people to testify, I might call you.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I'm in the loop a little bit. There's several advocacy organizations that I'm pretty close to now, a lot on the brain tumor front, but there's some on the caregiver side as well, and patient advocacy too. I guess it was last week, I became a board certified patient advocate. So that was a really exciting designation to formalize a lot of the experiences, because I'd had the good story, right? People knew and trusted that I had a story to tell because the experiences that I'd been through were so intense. And I'm able to at least share some insights and pull that curtain back in a way that's meaningful. But being able to really anchor those experiences with a more professional certification was a big milestone. And to be able to say, yeah, here, listen to my story, and here's why you should listen to it, because I'm helping connect the dots between the lived experience with what we need to actually take away actionably from this.
Yeah, that's incredible. What I remember the most about, my time working with you is you did have to juggle. You had to keep food on the table. You were still going through a lot of changes within the family structure, but also showing up for your clients. I can't remember a time where you were not smiling on a call with me. I was the one that was like, creating the energy that was keeping the hamster wheel moving, if you will. But, I just recall so vividly you always creating this joyful space. And you did that also for your family while advocating for August, and taking care of his older brother, and then eventually having a sweet little baby girl.
Uh-huh.
How were you able to continuously, just and very consistently show up for them?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. I really, it's surrender to a source or whatever that is, like that energy we can generate ourselves to some extent. It's that fire starter energy. It's the stuff that comes from inside of you that exists for sure. But part of it's connecting that with something bigger and just knowing and trusting that that's going to serve you the same way you want to care for yourself.
Mm.
And I think there's just a lot of surrender in that. And so even today, the way that I try to handle things is, I always try to do my homework to the best I can, with what is in my control. It has to get done. So that part has to happen. That drives me day to day. The vision and surrender piece comes through a lot of reflection. And I'm not as big on like meditating per se, not to say that that's a bad thing. For me, I haven't quite figured out how to do it, to be honest, at least without moving. And so for me, my meditation mostly comes through endurance sports. And so running or biking, it's that internal narrative that I have when I'm doing those activities where I give my body an outlet to go and metabolize its emotions. And then I can create space for my own internal dialogue. And I think the commitment I've just made even to myself is that space is supposed to set a tone for safety, either for myself, for the people I care about. And when we feel safe and cared for, we can be closer to reaching our potential. Like, you don't get access to your potential if you're being afraid and acting out of fear and not feeling safe. If you are experiencing those things, you are inherently stunted. And so I've always tried to remain with a steadfast commitment to making that space available either for myself or for others or my clients or whoever that is, right? However we're showing up, that let's create a safe space for us to innovate and dream. And whatever that looks like is just how we show up that day.
Yeah, I love that so, so very much. You know, I'm thinking of this one particular Facebook post that you guys had. You had this dark time with August where you didn't know if he was going to make it. And you guys, he hung in there. He's such a fighter. He went to see Mickey. He had himself a good time. It was like, we're not done yet.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we literally got home. So we got some really bad news in October that the brain cancer had come back for a third time after the first diagnosis. So I like to tell people that he's a 4-time brain cancer survivor and a stroke survivor at only 6 years old in kindergarten, which tells you a lot about who he is as a person, because you're exactly right. He's a fighter and a force on his own entirely. But we got some bad news that the cancer had returned to the original location, which had been already addressed surgically. We couldn't do any more surgically with it. And then also couldn't radiate it anymore, which is really the standard of care. So we found ourselves at a crossroads where traditional medicine said, we have nothing else for you in our toolbox. We've exhausted the tools in that toolbox. Here's what we usually do in these cases, and that's palliative and hospice care. And so they sent us down that path. They encouraged us to move up our Make-A-Wish trip, which we'd been planning for a period of time before that. It just so happened that we were going to be doing that trip within a few weeks of receiving this news. And so we moved the trip up, and you're right, we got to see Mickey and then came home and he was still doing well. So we bought or rented a 16 passenger van and piled our family in it and a couple extended family members. And we drove overnight, like 2 days later from getting home from Disney. We drove overnight to the Grand Canyon
Mm.
and we saw the Grand Canyon and we saw a couple other national parks along the way and got to see Route 66, which my son is a huge Cars fan. And so being able to see that in real life was so cool. And then we've been trying for about 5 years to visit some family in Hawaii that had been both in Maui and Kona. And so we planned on giving the kids a trip to Hawaii for Christmas, but we did not know if we'd get the luxury of that kind of time. So we said, you know what, let's just go now. And so we did our road trip to the Grand Canyon. My in-laws dropped us off at in Phoenix. And then we got on a plane and went to Maui for a few days, and then continued on to Kona and spent Thanksgiving with my sister in the cloud forest in Kona, which was everything magical you could possibly imagine and incredibly healing. And we came home, having the travel itch satisfied, and we could really just settle into our kind of quote new normal in the home, despite all of the heaviness that we were facing, even, the uncertainty of what was ahead. August continued waking up every day. Okay. And even now in April of 2025, almost 6 months later, he woke up again today and he's okay. And there's not an explanation for it clinically. There's not a functional explanation for why we're experiencing what we're experiencing, because every other reason would suggest that he should not be here. And he should not have been here several times over, not just in the last few months, but in the last few years. And he is still here. And the impact he's having on people is remarkable just through his existence. Just the fact that he's here, I think, inspires others to believe in miracles, and then also believe and maybe be inspired to surrender into something bigger than themselves, that there is something that influences the world that we experience day to day. And he's an example of somebody who's so aligned with that it's impossible to not see that when you look at him.
I mean, I have no words. I'm trying not to cry here.
I know
It's this beautiful, explanation of why we choose faith every day and why we choose to surrender and just ask for the next right divine action to be ours. Because we are all here for higher purpose and for this quest for just joy and to live, no matter if it doesn't feel like it on our hardest days. And so it's so wonderful. And I'm just watching from Facebook, but
yeah,
I saw those pictures with Mickey and I was like, you know,
I know.
my boy made it.
Yeah, I know. I
Yeah,
know.
it's
And the other thing that's, I think, strength and endurance, I would say, are common themes as well alongside all of this. The conversation around fear versus surrender. I would say, some other striking experiences that I would love to share, just the strength required in anticipatory grief. Um, when when I found out the news about my son and we were waiting to get into the clinic appointment, and my body was shaking because I knew the gravity of what we were facing. I mean, I read the report on the mobile app before we even had a chance to chat with the physician. And I remember looking at my now partner, the father to my daughter, and I said, the strength I'm being asked inside right now is greater than anything I've experienced. To look at my son and not break down in not an inhumane way, right? Like, I've never kept crying from my kids. I don't keep that. I try to show them how I manage emotions, whether it's good or bad, and try to be vulnerable in that experience. But to not inspire fear in him because of what I'm experiencing and the strength required to not scare him was enormous. And even just to not scare myself, perhaps to some extent. That was a very, very, a very pivotal moment, I think, in my own mind. And living every day in that space of, I don't want to be so consumed in this moment. I don't want fear to take me away from this moment. I don't want it to take me away from being able to be present with my kids anytime I want to be. If I want to be there, I don't want to be so distracted by, what might happen. Because at the end of the day, there's a very bizarre luxury and gift in the experience that I've been given. And that's, I know there's a gravity and intensity to what we're facing. And I know the functional reality of what we're facing. But the gift is that we all have the same circumstances in our life. Nobody knows what their future tomorrow, next week, next month, next year looks like. We can hope for the best, but none of us know what's ahead. And that's true with my son. We don't know what's ahead for him either. I have no idea whether it's next week or next month or next year, 10 years from now. But we can't live our life afraid of living like that. And I think that that's a gift that I've been given from this experience to try to figure out how to make sense of. I don't want to let fear consume me and take me away from the things that I want to be present for. And I think that brings a whole different meaning to what mindfulness really is about. It's about being present and existing in the space and honoring and recognizing the joy that can exist in any given moment and not letting fear take that away from you.
Yeah, you're so right. We might not know I was raised Catholic. We might not know the day or the hour, but we can totally choose joy every day and use joy as a mindfulness tool. And that's not to keep your head in the clouds.
Exactly.
You're focused on what is the joyful item or opportunity or the thing of impact today, then you will simply be living in that state of faith and not fear. Oh my gosh, that was probably like, I was gonna when I started, I was gonna ask you, like, what are the three things that you learn that keep you sane? But like that in itself is a masterclass of how to show up present every day. Like full stop. Before we close, I'd love for you to share two things with everyone. A little bit about the nonprofit you created in August's honor. And then you've been doing a lot of work, in the advocacy space from, state capitals to Capitol Hill. I'd love for you just to talk about that so you could plug those nonprofits and yourself. Cause I mean, you're like on the dais, on the mic, rocking it. But how did you go about beginning to create something that would honest August now and forever?
Okay, we're almost done with this episode. But if today's episode sparked something in you, don't let the inspiration stop here. Head over to movementmakercollective.com, where we celebrate stories of bold changemakers, purpose-driven leadership, and joyful transformation. You'll find blog posts, resources, and reflections to keep you grounded and growing. We got to keep those roots rootin'. So if you're ready to build a movement or just need a soulful check-in, we got you. Continue your rebirth at movementmakercollective.com.
Yeah. So that experience was an interesting one because I'd always, like I shared earlier, embraced this entrepreneurial mindset and spirit through a lot of things that I've done. But I guess I had no idea how to go about and create like a nonprofit or even just a company at that point. And so we were in the hospital when my son was receiving treatment the first time after the first diagnosis. And we had a pretty aggressive chemotherapy schedule that meant that we had to spend a significant amount of time in the hospital. And I remember one of the things that I would do to kind of care for myself and be set in that space was I would draw pictures on the window of my son's hospital room door. And it was just the entry to the door, but it became a bit of a fixture for the identity of that room. So, and this is something, candidly, is something that a lot of parents do at pediatric hospitals across the country. They're doing this organically. And some hospitals will fund access to the art supplies required to do this artwork. But broadly speaking, it's usually the nurses that are just paying for the crayons themselves. So I was using this big community box of crayons that the nurses at the hospital we were at had pulled together and made available for the families. And I would just draw pictures at night. And I've always been a very artistic person. So the pictures I drew were memorable. And so it inspired a couple other patients on our floor as well to ask, hey, would you draw something for me too? And it was a nice space to be in to serve others when you're afraid, and trying to figure out like where you exist. And there's something very cathartic and serving others, even just in a very simple way, like drawing them a picture when you're in that space. And so I started making a habit out of taking requests for other patients on the floor. And then these pictures start to create an experience for the people that are in that space. And when you can't go very far, when you're stuck on the floor, stuck in your room, walking outside your room, for example, becomes a huge milestone. And maybe exploring the floor of walking down the hallway becomes a big thing. And we and the other patients on our floor would use that space to go look at all the artwork on all the different windows. And so I was drawing at 3 o'clock in the morning one night, and I was thinking about the really my son's mortality and even my own of, how do we give back to the community that has cared for us in this time? And not like return the favor one to one, but just, pay it forward. Like, we received this. How do we make sense of this and do something good in the future? Or in, the worst case scenario, if my son did not make it, is there something that we could do to help honor him and his journey for a long time, much longer than maybe his actual time on earth? And it led me to this space of, well, what if we created a fund that made these crayons available for every family across the country that has to spend a substantial amount of time in the hospital. And that thought exercise was very interesting. And this was 2019. So even before COVID, that exercise led me down a path of, well, what if we got, artists to come in and donate time and they could come do these pictures for the kids? And what if we, built a community, right? A movement around making artwork integral to the experience of healthcare, especially in pediatric hospitals. And it occurred to me, especially after COVID, that through this thought exercise, the value is not so much in the activity as it is what that artwork represents. And that artwork represents these formative, intense experiences that shape who we are as human beings for the rest of our life. So the model that I was thinking through from a business is less even about donating the crayons, but actually commemorating the artwork that the families and the children and the clinicians make in these spaces. Because when you leave, you don't get to take that with you. That's on the window, it gets wiped off, and then there's a new family and a new experience that happens in that space. So what if we commemorated that? Now it becomes an interesting tool in the toolbox, especially the more you learn about trauma recovery. Step one in trauma is to validate that what you went through was real.
Mm.
You have to do that before you can move on anywhere else. You have to validate that that experience did in fact happen and it was real, and that influenced where you went from there. And so this artwork commemoration becomes a really functional tool for trauma recovery, which is a broadly and grossly overlooked experience when we look at healthcare outcomes. And as an industry, we move to this space of, did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? Well, if your mind and your body and your spirit are all integral to one another, you can't remove one from the other. So you might cure the physical body, but your spirit and your emotions are still healing. And so you need other tools. You need to look at the whole experience, whether it's even the patient or the caregivers and the family and the parents. Everybody deserves access to the things that they need to heal. And so that's really what we focus on. So I founded a 501c3 nonprofit called August Artists, named for my son, August. And that's what we do is we make the crayons available for the family so everyone has access to them. And then we work with child life and social work and spiritual care to commemorate the artwork that the families, the parents, the caregivers, the clinical teams, anyone that's making artwork can use this artwork as a functional tool for their own trauma recovery. And so that's what we do. And then, like you mentioned, there's an arm of advocacy with this because you do need to create a movement that helps educate around the value of validation in trauma recovery. And a lot of folks, especially in healthcare, in a traditional medicine sense, our innovation broadly as an industry, when we look at clinical outcomes, has been inspired by an idea that we can isolate the physical body and heal it, and then other things fall into place. But that we're learning that that's not entirely true. And so there is an education required for everybody involved about how do you heal completely from these experiences when your body maybe is healed or not healed or whatever it is you went through. Or a parent might, have been through this experience and is now rattled emotionally and spiritually, but they themselves don't have any physical ailments per se. Those things are also closely tied. So the advocacy function of what we do is really aimed to make sure that we're educating everybody as much as we can around trauma and the impact of trauma and how those experiences that we have emotionally and spiritually impact the physical things that we experience and the outcomes we experience physically and clinically for that matter. And then, as legislation's wildly entertaining right now. and um, and a lot of that, at the heart of it comes down to health equity to some extent. And equity is really, does everybody have access to the same things and the opportunities for healing? And the way I think about it is, does everyone have access to the same outcomes? And if not, what needs to be there systemically to support that? And that's driven either through technology or legislation or policy. And it's all of those things working together that create opportunities for people to achieve whatever their potential is. And that's really at the heart of what I understand to be equity when we look at healthcare equity specifically. Does everyone have access to the same thing? And what do we need to do to create support for that?
Oh my gosh. You're such like a wealth of knowledge of so many things, but this conversation has just been, you know, so much fun just to catch up and to see your face, but also so inspiring to hear how, you fought for yourself and your son, and even in you modeling that behavior, he's learning what it's like to fight for himself. And
Yeah.
you are still giving through Artist August, through your advocacy. You all are just that's what I said at the start of the conversation. You are the embodiment of the Great MeSet and what it really means to be someone who's turning a moment of goodness, badness, richness, poorness, pain and joy into a real movement for change. I can't thank you enough for spending time with me to share your story and for opening your heart today.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and it's an interesting time for us to have a conversation because I my main surrender right now, and I talk a lot with my partner about this, but you know, there's been a lot of farming in a sense. Like we've been planting lots of seeds over the last few years, especially when it comes to the movement itself and what it is I'm trying to help inspire a direction of. And it can be taxing and you find yourself, at least for me, I ask myself, okay, why am I keep doing this? Like what's to come? And this is, I think, back to where surrender comes in, right? You just have to trust that what you're doing, if you're doing it from the highest place you can come from with your heart and your mind and your soul, that work will turn into something bigger and greater with an impact that you can't even imagine. And I still feel so much that I'm in the infancy of what this potential impact can look like, that I'm still just planting these seeds and I haven't even seen them sprout yet. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to even chat with you, Terri, because, sharing these thoughts and perspectives and mindset with you, I can't wait to revisit this conversation in a couple years and see what sort of harvest we can look at from the farming that's been done.
Yeah, so let's call in the people to help amplify your story and to
Yeah,
show you and teach you what you should be doing with those seeds. And we're going to manifest that for you.
love it. I love it. I'm here for it.
Well, thank you so much. We are so inspired by you and your family and continue to wish just an abundance of blessings for all of you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, y'all. Hey, don't forget the content shared on this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Yep, that's right. If you need medical, mental health, or other professional support, please consult a qualified expert. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't share, or tell your friends about this podcast episode. Of course, you can follow me at Movement Maker Collective on Instagram or at Terri B. Williams. And for all the inspiration you need to create change within yourself or to create change within your community,
You can start a movement by just typing in movementmakercollective.com. I promise there are tools, strategies, and tips to help you be a change maker in the world. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll chat with you next time.